Hello, can you hear me there? Good evening, my name's Damien Carrick. Welcome to the Wheeler Centre. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting this evening on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Now, our conversation this evening is titled Modern Confidential, Digital Privacy Today. The event forms part of Knowledge Week and it's presented by both the Wheeler Centre and its partners Liberty Victoria and the City of Melbourne. And our conversation tonight is being live streamed on wheelercentre.com. Is maintaining privacy in a digital age a reasonable expectation? While many of us say we still want it, we are willing to share our data and we dislike having to pay to protect it. Governments and online businesses covet our personal information. Meanwhile, almost nobody, certainly I don't, ever reads terms and conditions. We simply trust that if something goes awry, someone else, will notice it and do something about it. So, what should we be concerned about when it comes to privacy? What can we do about the concerns we have? And why is privacy even important if, as they say, you have nothing to hide? We have three great panellists for you this evening. Dr. Vanessa Teague. Vanessa is a senior lecturer in computing and information systems at the University of Melbourne. Her interest is in cryptographic protocols that support a free and democratic society. She's perhaps best known for her work on e-voting. Rachel Falk. Rachel is the Director of Technology, Security and Strategy at .au Domain Administration, also known as AUDA. Now, this organisation is the policy authority and industry self-regulatory body for the .au domain space. So effectively, AUDA administers the .au domain space. We also have Josh Bernstein. Josh has been the head of the National Employment and Industrial Relations Group at Maurice Blackburn Lawyers since 1997. And in that capacity, he has represented a large number of unions in tribunals and courts, including at the High Court. Now, Josh is also very focused on cutting-edge employment law issues, and he's also very active on Twitter and social media, and we might hear a bit about that later. Now, our conversation this evening is going to focus on open data, de-identification, cryptography and social media. It's also going to focus on how to defend our right to privacy and also our right to free speech. And we're also going to discuss whether we can separate out our online personal and professional lives. Now, our plan this evening is to have a conversation among the panel members for about 40 to 45 minutes and then open up the conversation to your questions, and we will have roving mics to take your questions. Let's start the conversation. Rachel, if I can start with you, a question for all three of you, but a brief answer from all of you. What is privacy to you?
So I think privacy to me is about keeping my personal information secure and about entities or anyone I give my private information to, keeping it safe and secure and not sharing it unless I've consented to. It's also about the right to choose what I want, what information I want to share with a small audience, a large audience, the world at large, and the right to be told if someone loses that information.
You want control.
Yeah, you want control, which may be, and we can discuss it, may be anathema to everything being in the digital age, but to me, at its very core, it's going back to the very sort of original concept of privacy, you know, what you do behind a closed door, what you want to keep safe and private for whatever reason. I don't believe you need to necessarily justify it, but it is something that you can seek to have some control over.
Vanessa.
Freedom, I think. The freedom to communicate with whoever you like, seek the medical treatment that you need, criticise the person that you want to criticise without necessarily feeling that you have to change your behaviour just in case those choices are subsequently used against you.
Really interesting answer. Josh.
Yep, very different. My perspective is, again, a bit more about control, controlling and protecting the information that I have, and that I don't necessarily want to share with the wider world. And there's another part of this in my, I suppose, social media activity, which is also protecting my family. So I may commit many sins as part of my Twitter activity. I don't want any of those visited on my family or relatives, workmates, colleagues. I want to have some sort of control over that.
So, in a nutshell, it's kind of safety and integrity.
Yep.
Okay, well, can I ask you to each give an example or a couple of examples where you would say that there has been a serious breach of privacy? Rachel?
For myself personally, or just generally that I'm aware of?
Whatever you like, whatever you think.
Obviously, it's hard. I think there are many examples delivered up every day. I think one that was particularly worrying to me was the Office of Personnel Management in the United States, where that was a US government department charged with looking after federal employees that sought a clearance, not people who are working in intelligence agencies. I did find it fairly alarming that it impacted, I think, overall 22 million people, but out of that there were approximately 6 million sets of fingerprints alleged to have been accessed and a range of personal information. And I think as someone I think who was interviewed about who had been through that process and had their details compromised, or they were either commenting on the level of detail required for those clearances, that they said, you know, that was not information that you would want to have made public. It was information about maybe things you did when you were at university. It was certainly, I mean, those are fairly intrusive. Anyone who's been through a security clearance generally, or those are fairly intrusive, but it's your deepest, and when I say your deepest, some of your deepest and darkest secrets. So I felt that for a government, and this is well documented, but for a government agency to have such a breach of such deep personal information, I found really alarming, because also the level of information and where it ended up and where it may, and you just don't know.
And for those of us who aren't familiar with this, when did this happen, and what level of how widely dispersed was this?
So I think it was September 2015. I think it's 2015 from memory, and it was alleged to have been, there's many public statements made in the US from various officials around, they believe, and where the hack came from is almost a side issue. They attribute it to foreign hackers or foreign nationals. The word Chinese is always bandied around. I'm reluctant to attribute it to any nation state, but it was attributed to a third party, certainly not a US-based third party. And I think it was General Hayden at the time, he'd been a former director of the CIA, had said, you know, shame on us if we let such systems be accessed in such ways. So, you know, it was a fairly, I thought, a fairly egregious breach. Irrespective of where it came from, it is about the fact that it could happen, and that systems were allowed to fall into a state where it happened and over a period of time. And I think that's the things, the people that were entrusted to have control and a level of integrity over those sites, for whatever reason it didn't happen.
Mm. Vanessa, what was an example for you of an egregious or a very serious breach?
Well, I agree with that very much. The Office of Personnel Records is the worst thing that I've heard of. And I think Rachel's point really emphasises that something bad in this space that has happened doesn't go away. So the people whose data was in that release, it's old news now, you know, it was a whole 2 years ago or something, but it doesn't cease to be relevant, because all of those people are presumably still working in powerful places in the American government. Whatever risk follows from that is absolutely alive and real today, probably even more so than when it first happened. You can't erase it or make it not have happened, and it doesn't become less important with time. If anything, it becomes more important with time. So I agree, that's the worst thing that's happened. The thing that's happened that I actually know something about is the open data release in Australia of a 10% medical billings sample and PBS sample that was released on the opendata.gov.au website back in August of last year. And my team of researchers managed to show that the encryption that had been used to protect the IDs of the doctors was fairly easy to reverse. So I think part of what's hard in this space is that unless you're a geek, it's hard to get a concrete idea of what we're actually talking about. So just to be clear what we're actually talking about, this is the collection of your Medicare and PBS billing records. So, you know, if you look up your Medicare bills online, you've got a date, a price, you've got an ID for the doctor who you visited or who did your surgery or whatever. You've got an item number, which doesn't necessarily mean very much to an ordinary person, but which is a fairly specific thing about what the particular procedure or prescription was. And you can get online catalogues that say, you know, 23 means you visited the GP, so-and-so is a prescription for a certain kind of medication, such and such is the code for a third trimester abortion or whatever. So some of these codes are very generic and harmless. Some of these codes are really intimate and specific. And each record contained an encrypted patient ID, an encrypted doctor ID, which we showed could be reversed, and the billing details that I've just described from 1984 to 2014. So if a person was in the 10% sample, all of their billing records for that 30-year period were in that sample. The dates were perturbed by a fortnight either way, randomly, in order to try and make it hard to re-identify those records. In some ways, everybody kind of knows that this has happened. In some other ways, I don't feel like it's really entered the public consciousness quite how much and how intimate that data was. Because even though it didn't give you test results or doctor's notes or things like that, it's quite evident when you start looking at this kind of data that what a person was billed for tells you a lot about their life. So I tried to look up myself. I'm not there, obviously, but from the process of looking up, myself gives you a little bit of information about just what this data set looks like and what it is. Okay, so there are 2.5 million people in the data set. Only about 17,000 have the same year of birth and gender as me. But now if I start looking for more detailed information about myself, I have 2 children who were born in Australia, 2006 and 2011. If I look for women my age who had children in those years, now we're down to 59 people. Like, so far it's been comforting, 59 not comforting, right? 25 of them are in Victoria. If I put their exact birth dates in, given the 2-week perturbation, there are no matches. So I can confidently say that I'm not in the data set, and in some ways that's comforting. But the issue, of course, is that this kind of information gives a very high degree of uniqueness. And so the concern in this kind of data is that the de-identification of this kind of data probably doesn't really work, and that in general, in public data sets of this kind, it can be really, really, really hard to do a good job of de-identifying this sort of data in order to make it safe to publish.
We'll come back and maybe talk about some of the policy settings which will perhaps aid the prevention or the amelioration of those kind of breaches in a moment. Josh, can you tell us about what you would regard as a serious breach of privacy?
Yeah, look, a couple of the examples that I have are ones where I think there's an egregious abuse of power against an individual. Because of my employment law background, there's quite a well-known case recently involving one of the major banks, unfair dismissal case, and in the course of the unfair dismissal case, it's adversarial litigation, an executive at the bank accessed the former employee's financial records or banking records to see how much money she had and to check how hard she could keep fighting. And so it's a very different story from this mass data thing, but it gets me in the guts to hear something like that. So that's one case. The person happily went on to sue the bank for breach of the privacy principles and was awarded compensation, substantial compensation, by the way.
That's rare, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's rare. That's rare. It's a good news story in that sense. The second one, again, which has got a lot of publicity recently, is the use of personal information as a political weapon, which was by the department managing Centrelink The case of, I think, Andy Fox, some of you may have read about it, who criticised the Centrelink program and for her trouble was met with a public relations and political response which involved leaking her personal sensitive information. Again, I think egregious because it's quite a nasty thing to do. It sends a very strong message if you want to criticise the government, you want to criticise the public sector over our administration of what I think is a widely discredited program, you will pay a price, and anyone else who wants to do it, they're going to pay a price as well. And in that case, no happy ending.
Not yet.
No, not yet.
I mean, I think the government's argument was, well, this person's been inaccurate in their allegations,
Yep.
And therefore she opened up the Pandora's box, and we have to kind of put the real information out there. I think that was the argument.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
And you either accept that or you don't. I don't.
In this age obsessed by the government wanting to know all about you, and I guess the corporations, can privacy be saved, Rachel?
Can privacy
Be saved? What can we do?
I think can privacy be saved? Well, has it gone already? Has it, is that just a train that went a long time ago? I think for me, there was a comment made, I think it was by General Hayden, around 30 years ago we would have just, everything we would have had would have been kept in filing cabinets. You visited your doctor and there would have been a paper file, and everywhere you went, the school files, everything was in paper. And now we put all these scribbages in the internet and they're all interconnected. So can it be saved? I don't know. I think that would rely on an answer where every internet-facing server, which is generally where a lot of things can be accessed from, is safe and secure. Chances are 100% that's not the case. So I don't know if it can be saved. I think, isn't it a matter to me of approaching it on the basis that you expect some leakage or cross-fertilisation. You expect some third parties to process it, organisations to have privacy statements that you have to accept, that in turn say we reserve the right to share your data with third parties who may provide us with services in delivering whatever it is we do to you. I think I would defy anyone, and it's a good test. Can you live off the grid, so to speak, for 30 days? Could you possibly go without signing up to something for 30 days? I don't think any of us could. And, I give the example, I recently was overseas and I had to I did a dolphin swim, and they made me fill out this online form, and clearly I was an adult. I had to do a waiver, and they had my name, my full name, my address, and then they wanted my date of birth. And I said, I'm an adult. I think that's pretty obvious. You don't need my date of birth. You just need to be satisfied I'm over the age of 21 in this particular state I'm in. They said, no, our data's all secure. This is the person behind the desk of where I was, and I don't doubt that, but you don't need my actual date of birth. I could have a checkbox that just said I was an adult. So I'm sure they may have had the most secure systems, but I don't think blind faith in anything. I think, obviously I'm not probably going to be like Vanessa and be, I don't have that level of technical skill to determine it, but that's the problem. None of us do. You can't get behind the tools of any organisation and, go to your bank and go, I want to see your compliance sheets, and even then that wouldn't be certainty. So finding true certainty about the true state of operational security will be hard. So I think it is potentially scrutinising what you do give away if you're prepared for what you're getting. So it's that informed consent balance.
Well, that's really interesting. You sent me this great article earlier today. It was about a company in the US called Unroll.me or Unroll Me. Tell me about what's happened with that corporation.
Well, I think more broadly, rather than picking on them, because I'm a former lawyer, so I'm always careful about that. I think it's always about...
Article in the New York Times, guys.
Yeah, it was an article in the New York Times, publicly reported, but I will be careful. I don't like to pick on particular apps, but I think it was about, again, the cross-fertilisation. I think you read it, it was about how you could cross-fertilise information and potentially use information to find out about a competitor. But like any app, I think it was you earlier, who reads the terms of service right, who's got the time? Well, I urge all of you, next time you sign up to an app, just take the 5 minutes, just look at the bit that says what we will do with your data. And I guarantee some will be fine and others will have you twitching.
But you don't read the terms of service because you're not meant to read the terms of service.
Yes,
it's like signing a mortgage or a lease. Those are documents prepared that are deliberately made lengthy, extremely complex, so that people don't read them.
Well, I think
It's an art form.
Yeah, and like a more, I don't know. It's like any documentation. You are expected to read it, but I think and as a lawyer, the flip side is, what do you do if you challenge? There's no right of challenge. It's like if I went to my bank and went, I don't actually like clause 2.4 of my mortgage, they're going to go, let us sit down and talk about it. It's a standard form,
what's your
right?
bargaining power anyway?
Yeah. So I think for me, it's about that consent. So you might not want to sign. You might not have an ability to change it, but you can, in most circumstances, have an ability to go, I don't want to actually take that app. It's not the app. I don't want whatever I'm doing to have access to my contacts, my camera, my microphone, all my details, and publicly make it available, and then make it available for third parties who may want to on-sell it. So magically I'm getting emails from some other provider I've never heard from. Yeah, I think when you become the product is the worry.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we don't understand. We think that we are receiving the service as opposed to being the commodity for sale.
Yeah, and in terms of service, I mean, you might have a view on this, Vanessa. I'm always interested where it says we reserve the right to share your anonymous or de-identified information for business insights. I think that's really interesting. I don't actually remember a lot of business insights coming back towards me, and where my provider might be going, Rachel, we've noticed that you've been travelling a lot. Can we give you a special deal on travel insurance? Or I'm actually waiting for the insights to hit me. Maybe they're coming, but business insights just haven't quite been my way.
Do you think privacy can be saved, Vanessa?
Yes, but I think we'd better act hard and get a bit better organised. I think there's actually a collection of slightly different problems. So, for example, privacy of things like your tax data or your health data, or data that you generated for some particular purpose and you had to generate and you had to hand over, that's one kind of collection of problems. And then there's a separate problem, and I completely agree with the apps creep me out. I've actually stopped every app that I can stop on my phone. I think the phone and the SMS app on my phone still work. I think it's phenomenal how much data is collected about you when you don't even realise. And that, I think, is the thing that we should be pushing back on right now as hard as we can. There's no reason that we should have to put up with that at all. There's no reason that you shouldn't be able to turn off access to your microphone and your camera on your phone. It's your device. You bought the device. Why can't you turn off access to those kinds of apps? Access to those kinds of details. We tried to buy a car recently. I probably shouldn't name the name of the brand of the car. Very sophisticated car, really fancy, quite expensive. Very advanced techniques for autonomous driving. So I said to the people who were, the 25-year-old who was trying to sell me the car, so what about privacy? It's got this fancy little GPS unit. How do I know that my data is private? Poor guy didn't really think about who he was talking to and said, oh no, don't worry, ma'am, it's all stored in the cloud, it's perfectly secure. But if in the unlikely event your car did get stolen, we could instantly tell you exactly where it was.
Yeah.
Gets better.
The upside?
Yeah.
So my husband, who's even a bit more geeky and paranoid than me, looked at the AI techniques on the web. So this company had quite an extensive description on the web of how they developed the AI for their autonomous driving techniques. Guess what they use as the input data for the learning algorithm? The constantly streaming video from the front and the rear camera of every car they've ever sold. So we go back to the people, we say, what about this video streaming thing? Oh no, never mind, don't worry about that, it's all perfectly secure. I say, what about the audio from the cabin? You've got this fancy voice-activated command system. Is that processed in the cloud as well? Oh, no, we'd never stream audio from the cabin, don't worry.
Not that bad singing you do by yourself in the car.
We said we want to run it without the SIM card. So we want to test drive it without the SIM card. We'll consider buying it, but we want all this uploading stuff turned off. Can we test drive it that way? Oh, certainly, we'll organise that for you right away. Are you sure about the audio upload, by the way? Will the audio commands still work now that we've got the SIM card taken out of the car? Sorry we wasted your time, madam. We'll make sure we get your deposit straight back to you. So we didn't buy the car. We never managed to test drive it without the SIM card. This is a car, right? It's not meant to be a recording device. And there is absolutely no reason that any of that data should ever go to anybody other than the person who bought the car. You don't even really need GPS upload to see your own GPS maps. You can download the maps and then do that computation locally. So I think the thing that really upsets me about that is there was no honesty about how much of that data was being uploaded. It was only because we're totally paranoid and we really put extra effort into finding out about it. So I think the take-home message there is it's time to push back right now, right? You can't buy a car without a seatbelt. Why should you be able to buy a phone that doesn't have a manual disconnecting of the microphone? Why can't you buy a laptop that comes... Why can you buy a laptop that doesn't come with a little physical cover of the camera? These things are safety features and they should be in everything.
You are the customer from hell for cars. That's correct. Have they ever had a customer experience like that? At what point did the sales guy start crying is what I want to know. Fantastic story.
Amazing. There was a case recently in the USA where the patients of a psychiatrist all started to receive recommendations from Facebook to friend each other. And effectively their anonymity as patients receiving psychiatric treatment was blown. And it's a bit unclear about what happened. I mean, maybe just Facebook was kind of tracking where these people were, realised that they were all somewhere together and they must have something in common. And they might like each other as friends. Very, very interesting case. Yeah.
Yep. What can I just add something? Can privacy be saved? At the moment, you have to be very pessimistic. Technology has raced ahead. You're in a very rare position to even have that conversation. So, what percentage of us are ever going to push back in that same way? Less than 1%. At all. We don't know, we don't appreciate all the information that's being mined. I'm not so concerned about government. Government can be bad enough, but the private sector is running amok.
Yep.
Can it be saved? I don't think it can be saved, but can it be regulated? Can it be controlled? Yes. That's a question of choice. That's a question of political will. Regulation fell out of favour about 30 or 40 years ago. It may be coming back. There's some suggestions that we're going to be less of a deregulation, have less of an emphasis on deregulation, but to me, technology, like multinationals paying taxation, is a question of regulation. Facebook, Google, Amazon are companies that could be broken up if they, if government so decided, or regulated properly. And we're not at the stage in our political or social or technological awareness to even start, I think, pushing very far in that direction, but at some point it might.
What would that
happen.
look like, Josh? I mean, I don't know. I don't even have the words to describe in a nutshell what that framework would be.
Well, it might be regulating the phones that we all are addicted to, so that there is protection, there is full disclosure that any data that is going to be captured when any product is sold to us, there's a clear full disclosure and clear consumer choice. We don't even know about a lot of this at the moment. So consumer awareness, requiring companies to disclose, giving people informed options, that's a question of regulation. We've been there before. This is a different era, a technological revolution, a digital revolution. We can start to push back the other way.
It's also about, I guess, people with the knowledge, people like Vanessa, getting out there and telling us that there is a problem out there.
Correct.
What happens when... What was it? Can you, cycling back to where you were talking about the health data, what was the upshot of that when that became in the public domain?
I think the details are still not in the public domain. I think the government is still thinking it through, and I'm hoping that there will be a
You
good...
pointed it out to them as a researcher?
Yes.
Okay. What are the legalities around you kind of probing and testing the privacy safeguards? Because
Right.
I understand there's some legislation which might make that kind of work a bit harder.
Right. So I am not a lawyer. My layperson's understanding is that that is not a law. And maybe Josh can speak to it. But
I'll let you
doesn't
continue
pass
for
through the
those.
Senate, then it's not a law.
Yeah.
I think the law is wrong. I think it's making a
Tell us
mistake.
what this law
So
is.
the law is to say, specifically relating to de-identified published government data, this is a proposed amendment to the Privacy Act that would make it a criminal offence to deliberately re-identify people in data like the MBS and PBS sample I was talking about a minute ago. And I think the reason that the government hasn't thought this through is that they're confusing an indication of a problem with the actual problem. So my perspective is that when someone like me or my research group shows that a data set like that can be re-identified, that should be regarded as a good thing. Right? That should be regarded as showing you the tip of an iceberg, and you should be a lot more worried about the rest of the iceberg than about trying to stop people from explaining to you what the problem is. So if a small band of troublemaking researchers can re-identify sensitive data based on the very limited amount of information that's available to the public, then you have to worry about how easy it is for larger corporations with more data to do that same re-identification for a much larger fraction of the population. So, for example, in the case of billing data, you have to wonder about whether the banks which already see everybody's Visa card bills, or the health insurance companies that already have probably a lot of the very same transactions in their database, can do an even easier job of re-identifying some government data. So in general, the reason I think the re-identification bill is doing exactly the wrong thing is that you should be encouraging people to investigate these kinds of weaknesses. And of course you should insist that they disclose them responsibly to the responsible department or the government first. And of course it's appropriate to have laws that say, that ban the exploitation of the data, the reselling of the data, the embarrassment of individual people that you've re-identified as a result of the data. All those kinds of things I completely agree should be a crime, but the actual investigation of the re-identification itself should not be a crime.
Rachel?
I'd agree with everything Vanessa said. I think you want to encourage, and it's similar to the private sector. Many companies offer bug bounties. They offer the ability for researchers or just geeks or anyone who's interested to find a vulnerability and report it in. And it's for often good reasons. And sometimes you'll find security researchers writing about it because they haven't been able to get a response from the company they've tried to email or say we've found a vulnerability. So I think in essence it's extremely important that we do encourage what's called the ethical approach to it, as long as it's not used for evil and it's not used for all the wrong reasons. Absolutely, I would support a law that if de-identification results in publication or misuse of data, but you do want to encourage the finding of simply if a cryptographic, if the crypto is not strong enough that Vanessa comes along and says, look, we think this could be enhanced, that can only be a good thing. I mean, government is required to follow various guidelines. There are the Australian Signals Directorates, mandatory sort of top four, and they are required to follow a range of security guidelines. So it's only a good thing when you get people, well-intentioned researchers coming out and saying, look, we've had a go and we were able to crack it, because you can bet your bottom dollar if Vanessa's well-intentioned team can do it, then somebody else with less good and pure intention will be doing it to have a crack for all the wrong reasons, and you don't want that.
It's almost like punishing whistleblowers.
That's exactly what I was thinking. And I've just been before a parliamentary committee on whistleblowing laws which are going to be reformed, arguing that we need incentives. So to actually encourage better governance And it's the same with this issue. I think the same approach should inform it.
Do we know where these laws are at? All these proposed laws?
So far, the Labor Party and the Greens and the crossbench senators have said that they will not support it in its current form. That's all I know.
Do we know if any other jurisdiction around the world has similar laws?
I don't think so.
I don't know of any, but there may be.
We've talked about the costs of data collection by government and big business. Are there benefits that we should, be acknowledging before we throw the baby out with the bathwater? Josh?
I draw a big distinction between government and the private sector. So yes, I was a willing participant in the recent census, which was unfortunately a debacle. But I didn't have the same sort of philosophical or other objection to the fact that it was online. There are good reasons. We want governments to develop good policies and know where to build a road, a hospital, and service the community. So, yes, of course, there's good reason for the government to collect information, data, to produce good outcomes. It can be abused, and that's where we need regulation. The private sector, I wonder why wouldn't we just have a prohibition, for example, on any service provider on selling information? Just simple.
A blanket prohibition.
You can't do it. Why not?
I agree.
Why is
It's
it a
not
wow?
yours.
Why is it even a wow? Why should... That's how far this has gone. We just expect it,
Our
don't we?
assumptions.
So it's a wow when you say you're not allowed to do that. It shouldn't be. We never signed up for it. There wasn't this practice did not develop because consumers said, I want you to sell my information to some other nong who will then use it. So...
Vanessa,
Yeah,
Rachel, you're
agree.
both nodding vigorously. Yeah.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
Data sharing makes everything worse, and I've yet to hear a single argument that that's in the interest of the consumer. For government data, I also agree with you. It is clear that there are advantages to... I actually kind of love the whole philosophy around, open data and open government and evidence-based public policy. I'm all in favour of all of that. I just think that that same philosophy should be applied to what the choices that government makes about what they do with data. So let's have some openness about where the data goes. Let's have openness. Let's have not only openness, but also scientific evidence-based decisions about how to keep data secure. I think there's very good scientific evidence that de-identification of complex records about individuals does not work. So we shouldn't be publishing that kind of data, but there are other kinds of data that we can publish. We recently finished a study about Sydney's Opal cards, some data about the Opal cards, and it was pretty basic
The equivalent
data.
of the Mikey.
Yeah, Mikey,
Yep.
Mikey for Sydney. And it ended up being pretty basic data that just gave you a sort of number of totals. This number of people touched on at this time and this number of people touched off at this place and time. Not this person followed the following trajectory over the following 2 weeks. So there are some kinds of data that can safely be published. It can be a good thing if you're clear about what it's for. And there is a science behind understanding what violates people's privacy and what doesn't.
What do you reckon average Australians can do to support stronger privacy rights? Rachel?
Well, I think it gets back to a comment that was made before, that it's time we kind of all questioned it. That even though we all know that when we go to sign the mortgage or get a new service around bank, it's unlikely they're going to go, yeah, let's talk about our privacy statement, we really want to chat to you about it. But I think being open and questioning it and doing what you did with the car salesman, who probably still is rocking in a corner, but I think it to me, every bit counts. I'm sure the poor person with the dolphins probably thought she was really pesky. But, little by little, people go, when they're talking about it, they go, yeah, we've had more and more people asking about the in-car GPS. And I think it's very difficult to have a scenario where you will get a large corporation to change their terms of service unless you have deep pockets and want to litigate it, which some people do. They do want that kind of, they want to do that really generous litigation. I think it's important to understand that, unfortunately, there is a whole industry of data mining, and like it or not, it's here to stay. We won't be able to reverse that, and are we the product, and are those insights I'm yet to realise? Are those insights helpful for me? I don't know. I don't know. There's probably a whole bunch of algorithms running at the back of everything we use that may well give me a benefit. But I think...
Like what?
I don't know. I'm still waiting for them. I don't know, because as we were talking, I'm thinking, actually, what insights that they all would have that really, maybe the targeted credit card increase, I don't know. I'm trying to think of them as I'm talking. But for me, it's about data aggregation. So it's not just about I go to my bank and whatever they do. It's about when all that gets aggregated, you want to put your supermarket rewards with your frequent flyer points with something else, and suddenly, where does that go? I question, so suddenly everyone knows my pattern of life. I may not care about that. And in some, and I'm going to be relatively controversial, there will be some circumstances where pattern of life is incredibly important. In the midst of a security incident or a terrorist incident, you want the intelligence agencies and police to access pattern of life for certain people quickly. I get that. What I don't get is whether, and you know, people who arguably have a Facebook account here, they freely hand up pattern of life. And when I do hear, there was a lot of, obviously data retention is a huge issue, but when I heard a lot of people, and I've done a lot of work on this in my prior life, you know, people get very upset about government, but I kind of think when you're saying that, I'm thinking people freely give a lot of information to Google, to Facebook, to Twitter. It's not difficult to construct a pattern of life about someone. And if it's done for good reasons at the time in a public emergency, and it's, say, any one of us here with our loved ones being in jeopardy, I think we'd all agree, I don't mind if I can't find a bushwalker. I don't mind the police accessing that location information quickly if it's life or death. I don't have a problem with that. Do I have a problem with Google saying, it's only 45 minutes to your drive home, Rachel? Yes, maybe that's a bit creepy. So to me, it's about the scale of public good, emergency, public safety, and it's about the, is it really convenient and nice, the creepiness aspect? So there's a real left and right of art for me.
It's really interesting you say that, because in some ways it's not just the big corporations or government. I was reading about a Russian social network, the equivalent of Facebook, and it allows someone to take a photo of you on the street and then upload that app, and it will match your photo with all the other photos already up on this social network. So the curious photographer who maybe wants to ask you out on a date can take that photo of you across Red Square, and hey presto. Yeah. What does that? What comes to mind for you guys about that, Vanessa, Josh?
The establishment of a police state, or the re-establishment of a police state. I mean, that. I don't know how we make sure that doesn't happen. I think I'm sure that the technology to do that is available here as well, but I think it should be made very clear that it's not acceptable behaviour. I don't really know what else to say.
Josh?
So my difficulty with the idea that consumers are going to lead the charge is that we've got two subject matter experts next to us, and what you two can do is, again, wildly different to what most other people would even understand by the transactions, the situations they're in. So that's not going to happen through individuals saying, I want to renegotiate the terms of this app contract. It's just not going to happen. It comes back to a very old-fashioned thing, politics and law reform. If we're going to try and have some say in data and data harvesting and some attempt to manage private information, then it has to become a political issue and then a law reform issue.
And there are some pollies who seem to get it.
There's some.
Yeah.
I think there's a long way to go though. We're very early in the cycle. Yeah.
But I put it to also, it's a generational thing. If you talk to younger people, particularly kids, like I've got teenage kids, they grow up and they are used to an age where they freely share. So there is a difference. I mean, we are relatively old-fashioned. Some, they don't care. They're used to living a life online. I'm not judging it, but I'm saying there's probably a societal thing. It's a very generation-based thing, and I agree. You know, one or two people, unless we want to have motivated litigation to take on some of these privacy statements, you do have to also hope there are lots of, and I'm not being Pollyanna here, but there are lots of really well-intentioned, good lawyers and corporate affairs people in the large corporations that you distrust who are the guardians of the creepiness factor and who are the guardians of the consumer.
I've had some dealings with them.
Yeah,
I mean,
they do exist.
Ask anyone who's been trolled about their interactions with the big corporations, because ask the police about it. They can't get cooperation. Those companies are so enormous now, they can do what they want. They are incredibly powerful, and I've seen that up close with trolling issues where people fear for their safety and are struggling to get a response from Google, get a response, will you take this down, get a response from Facebook, you know, a fake post. I've had the experience myself. It was unbelievable. And talking to police, they say, mate, we can't force them to do anything at the moment. So there may be well-intentioned people. They're very hard to get to in an emergency.
Sure.
We have 15 minutes to go until the end of the hour. And yeah, look, let's have some questions from the audience. We do have roving mics. I should let you know we are kind of recording this session. The cameras aren't on you, but there might be some voice recognition software somewhere that might recognise you.
Thank you. At a recent exhibition on 3CR for their 40th birthday, they had a little shelf of redacted ASIO files on people involved with community radio, people who'd been to rallies, etc., etc. What can we expect in the future in terms of that equivalent thing?
Won't need a shelf.
Say that again, Josh?
You won't need a shelf. It'll be a little
USB stick.
Yeah, USB stick.
Yep.
I think one thing that's really changed is back in the bad old days, at least they would have had to make a particular decision to target a specific person, which is not to say that they always had a good reason or that they necessarily targeted people that they should have, but somebody made a decision to make a file on a particular individual. Whereas now we have this kind of mass surveillance. Everybody's metadata gets retained just in case you turn out to be a terrorist. And I think that's a fundamental shift.
Rachel.
Going to be controversial here. I think, you know, to be honest with you, there's not enough hours in the day of people at any of the intelligence agencies to simply want to grow big files. I think, you know, it all has to fit within the terms of the legislation for various agencies, and they really do have lots of other big targets than whether my metadata is at risk or whether whether they want to trawl through it. So what to expect, I think, absolutely. I think government has been transparent about heightened security. That's really a known factor at the moment. And I think it's obvious where they will focus their attention at the moment, rightly or wrongly, but certainly it has to be within the remit of their legislation.
Any other questions? Yep.
Yes.
After you. No, you go first and then.
All right. We've all experienced the business of going on a holiday and you put in a question in the search engine. I'd like to go to Berlin and I want to see some sites. Within a few minutes, you've got a huge list of stuff like that. And then we also get the ones where Woolworths, out of a Danish site, have offered us $2,000 in prize money and all of that, which, of course, we quickly unsubscribe and ditch. Now, my question is, it's going back to your birthday with the dolphin one. Mm. What if you actually put in a totally incorrect date, and if we actually started to, as a group, give misinformation to actually create a confusion in the system, would that have any effect? Because, I mean, I'm not quite serious about it. Yep. There's a lot of things that we do now as retired couple, apart from travelling, and that is when we go shopping, we just shop with cash money now. We rarely use the credit card. So that the supermarket can't actually pick up our shopping habits and send us a million advertisements about what sort of ham I'd like to buy. All of that. But I'm quite serious. Is it? I mean, if we actually, as more and more people, put in false information, will this actually create a flat tire for the system?
Oh, can I answer that one?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a really good question, and there are really good answers to that question. So, there's an excellent troublemaker called Helen Nissenbaum at NYU. I think she's recently moved to Cornell. And she, on the one hand, she's a philosopher who thinks a lot about privacy. And on the other hand, she has a number of software projects designed to automate exactly the kind of process you are now describing. So the first one is called Ad Nauseam. And what it does, you can download it from the web if you like. And when you're presented with a page of ads from the internet, one of the ways that they track you is they'll track which ads you click on, and then they'll give you back more of the same kinds of ads, and the people who paid Google to give you that ad have to pay Google more money because they got more clicks. Helen's Ad Nauseam program clicks on every ad on every page while you happily navigate the web.
That's funny.
Which is why it's recently been blocked by the Chrome web browser. That's okay. Download Firefox, turn on private browsing mode, and I hope it helps.
Although I must admit, I get ads constantly for tummy tuck in Thailand and alcohol, tummy tuck and also alcohol rehab in Thailand, which is weird because
So what do you want to share with us now?
Yeah, that's right. I know, but the irony is I don't search for alcohol, I don't buy alcohol, or search online, and I don't know where tummy tuck, and I'm constantly wondering, what is it about my demographic and searching habits that says I need the tummy tuck and the alcohol rehab?
Josh, did you have anything to
No,
add?
I won't answer that.
No,
I can't beat that.
okay.
I can't beat the tummy tuck.
Now, there was another question down here, I think. Yep.
Thank you. One of the issues you've talked about is the activities of Australian politicians, but I worry more about our data going offshore and having no way of legislating to dictate how that's going to be dealt with. So perhaps somebody could address that issue.
Yeah, really interesting.
I mean, I think you can. There's no reason why we can't regulate information going offshore. We regulate trade, international trade. So again, I don't think there's, in principle, any reason we can't try and regulate it. But it's caught up in the broader malaise that we're not really at that time in our political awareness or technological awareness that there is a major push to do that.
I get the sense that the Europeans are a bit more down the track than, say, us or the Americans or other Western countries. Is that a fair assumption?
Europeans certainly are with directives around what can be done and in which places it can go. There are obligations in the Privacy Act here, albeit some may say a bit weak, that if I'm an Australian entity governed by the Act and I want to offshore any data to another party, they are bound by, I as the organisation, you are vicariously liable. So I'm responsible for any data breach offshore. But I absolutely agree with you. I think not only that, is you actually don't know where it's going. So you would not even know what's being shared overseas.
Correct. I think that's the difficulty. We just wouldn't know.
You wouldn't know.
It was happening.
Yeah, until such time with the new data breach notification, you might get something sent to you which says, you know, we were dealing with a supplier in X country, and we've just been notified there's been a breach, and that's maybe when you start to find out where the web sort of went to.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I was wondering if you guys would like to talk a bit about privacy as it relates to the workplace. My understanding is that legislation is fairly meagre in this area, especially regarding things like social media or, say, email, and what expectations people can have that what they do at work remains private.
Well, can I answer that one?
You can.
Well, yeah, and
I'll have a crack after you.
Yeah,
you go first.
I suppose I've worked in an organisation where it was certainly, we did not seek to limit ordinary use of social media and came up with, I think, a fairly robust and sensible policy around that. I think certainly employee use is something that I think is accepted now, and almost like a human right, a basic human right. I think if you're talking about employee data though, and how employers must handle data, I think again that can be a bit of a grey area around what is my employee data, where is it then going, and what's happening with it. But certainly. I know in the past when I've seen certain sites restricted, there's been an uproar by various parts of a workforce saying, well, I want to have access to that particular site, or you know, that it's my right to have access to whatever it might be, absent it being an offensive site or something that's almost illegal.
Huge issue. Employment data is actually exempt from the privacy principles at the moment in the private sector, not in the public sector. So there's been recommendations and lobbying about changing that because there's no good reason to treat them differently. I tell people to come and see me who get into all sorts of trouble to assume, and I tell my staff actually, to assume that whenever you do an email or whenever you search the web, assume your boss is looking over your shoulder. That is the safest assumption you can ever make. I know we have 1,100 employees these days, so we're quite a large company. HR departments, I'm sure in our operation, but all across Australia, will vet applicants for jobs based on doing a social media search of them. I've acted for people like Scott McIntyre, the SBS journalist, who posted on social media on his day off on Anzac Day several years ago. As a result of his controversial views that he expressed there about Anzac Day, was hunted down on Twitter by Liberal Party politicians and News Corp journalists, who then urged Malcolm Turnbull to intervene. Malcolm Turnbull intervened, rang the head of SBS, and Scott McIntyre's career at SBS was over in a flash. So the issue of having a private life, and your work life has been quite separate these days, that division has absolutely collapsed. There are now heaps of cases about dismissal based on what people do outside work. We see it often with sports, those terrible cases involving footballers who do bad things at nightclubs or outside work. We see that. But the whole notion of having a separate life from our work life is really collapsing.
But in fairness, I think too, and this is the litigator in me that comes out, if I am freely putting something on social media that is not closed, it's open, and people can see that on Facebook I called in and said I was sick, but clearly I wasn't. My view is, sorry, you put it out there, it's open source, we found it, and to me, if you live your life in public, you live your life in public, and if you are going to put something on social media that can be seen, then you run the... I'm not diminishing sort of serious cases. There is always a fine line between who is speaking. Am I entitled on my Twitter account to put a personal view about what I think about something, or is that the reflection of my employer? And I think that's the hard line, is when am I speaking as me, and when
But since when... When I go online, I'm not ever suggesting I'm speaking on behalf of anybody else except me. So that argument that's used by employers, I think, is completely disingenuous. No one in their right mind, for example, would have thought that Scott McIntyre's very controversial views on Anzac Day had anything to do with SBS's views about that. People who want to get their political opponents sacked use that strategy and say, and we saw it recently with Yasmin and the same tradition.
Yasmin Abdel Magid.
Correct. It's become an Anzac Day tradition now to go after, the token lefty who puts something controversial about Anzac Day on social media, and for some to visit that on the ABC or to visit that on some other organisation. It's got no one in their right mind would confuse Yasmin's views with the ABC's views. That's just a disingenuous argument.
It's interesting, sports people, journalists, they are to some degree, their brands, their brand names to some degree.
But can the weatherman, at ABC be filmed at a Spartacus march and not have his life ruined, or at an IPA gathering of fruitcakes at the IPA? And not be absolutely smashed out of their career as a weatherman? That's, in my view, absolutely ridiculous, but it's going on. You don't contract out of your life to participate in democracy when you go to work at SBS reporting on soccer.
No.
So,
I think it's yeah, I just think it's a fine line, and I think it's a hard one sometimes, but you're absolutely right. You're entitled to have your persona as whatever your persona is. But often you will find, as you know, in contracts, employment contracts, there's often you can't bring this into disrepute, you can't be in the order.
Correct.
So and that's what the clause they'll always rely on.
That's what they rely on.
Yeah, that's right.
We have 2 minutes. There's a gentleman down here. We have time for one more question. So I'm sorry for all the people who want to make, but I've seen this guy down here who wanted to ask a few. Yeah. So very quick question, and we're going to have a 30-second answer from each of you. I'm sorry, that's all we have time for.
A quick question to challenge one of the themes that seem to be unanimous on the panel this evening. One theme is that if it's public sector, it's probably okay for some access. The other theme, very clearly, unanimous nodding of heads. If it's private sector, no way third-party access.
Yep.
I challenge that using, and I come from agribusiness, in the context of be careful perhaps what we wish for, because right now as we sit here, there are hundreds, probably thousands of farmers out there entering data about what they're doing and what we're going to eat tomorrow. Now, no argument that at an individual farm level you perhaps shouldn't get my data, but surely if that is aggregated up to third parties to be able to see what's happening to our food chain, got to be a positive. So I challenge just the simple concept, no third-party commercial access.
Sorry, can I just make sure I understand the question? You're not talking about sensitive data about an individual person. You're talking about data about farm produce and what's being grown and sold and so forth. I think that's a different kind of data. Unless the farmer particularly wants that data to be secret, then I don't think that fits into the conversation, the same conversation that we've been having about sensitive personal data.
The point I'm making is that the reaction this evening would... The point I'm making is that the reaction this evening, and I'm not attacking you, I'm putting the challenge out there, is that we are encouraging farmers to share nothing. So the message will be to farmers, don't share anything.
Okay, very quick wrap up from everybody. So to what degree do we share, and to what degree are we open to sharing, I suppose, is the rub of that question.
Again, I'm struggling to understand it, but to the extent that farmers want to share information with others, that's one thing. When I go and buy a loaf of bread or a pair of shoes, I want to buy a pair of shoes. I don't want to share my mobile phone number, my address, my hair colour, my political affiliation with any third party. I think it's quite simple, and I do draw a distinction about some categories of information with government for the reasons I said, but when I'm entering into a commercial transaction about a pair of shoes, it's about a pair of shoes. That's it.
Very quickly, final words from, or that's it.
I think we have to work hard to find out where our data goes and make some deliberate choices about reining in the current state of affairs, or we will not be free to do the things we want to do.
I think for me it's informed consent, absolutely. Share what you want to share. If it's third-party information that's for a greater good, absolutely. If it's not involving personal information, but where it involves personal information of shoe type and hair colour and all sorts of things like that, absolutely. It should be a need-to-know basis, and it should be informed consent. Know where your data's going and follow the data trail.
Thank you. Great conversation. I'd like you all to please help me thank our guests. We've had academic Vanessa Teague from Melbourne University, tech security strategist Rachel Falk from Outer, and lawyer Josh Bernstein from Maurice Blackburn. Thank you, all of you, for a very interesting conversation.